Why do some mothers have wonderful, positive, empowered births, whether natural or C-section, and others feel disappointed and even bereft? Why do some mothers feel confused and even pressured when it comes to making birth choices, such as C-section versus natural, breastfeeding versus bottle, what sort of pain management? Why are so many mothers not clear and confident in their birth choices? Most mothers simply hope that they will have a positive birth experience. Unfortunately, hoping to have a positive birth experience does not necessarily mean that you will have that. Every woman deserves compassion in birth and a gentle balance between her clinical well-being and her emotional well-being. Every woman should be empowered to make informed choices when it comes to her birth. And society, as well as her birth team, should, as far as possible, support those choices. The reality is, however, that not all women receive the information that they need to make informed choices. And sometimes the information that they do receive is biased. A lot of women are also pressured into making certain choices. Society has certain stigma surrounding certain choices, which just puts additional pressure onto the new mom. And lastly, society has created the idea of a perfect birth, which just sets up a mother for disappointment when things does not work out exactly as she planned. So just hoping for a positive and empowered birth is unfortunately not enough. I'm Alda Smith, one of South Africa's foremost and well-published birth photographer and mentor. I'm currently sitting in one of the many hospitals that I regularly capture beautiful birth journeys and mentor parents like yourself. It's also one of the places where I consult with some of the country's top gynecologists, midwives, doulas, and other birth professionals. Welcome to the introduction series of my antenatal course, At the Heart of Birth. In these 3 videos, I'm going to help you understand how to find clarity and confidence so that you can make informed birth choices and have the ultimate positive, compassionate, and optimized birth experience for you and your baby. A birth experience that you will love. So if you're pregnant and you feel slightly overwhelmed with the journey ahead, or confused and even a bit pressured about the choices you need to make, I would like you to join me in my studio where you will discover how to become clear and confident in birth so that you can make informed birth choices for a positive, optimized, and compassionate birth experience regardless of your choices, regardless whether you give birth at a hospital like this or at home, at a birth clinic. Join me now. I'm so glad you decided to join me for At the Heart of Birth. The goal of this series is simple. I want you to love your birth, and I want you to feel loved before, during, and after birth. No stigmas, no pressure, no bashing of choices, just a lot of unbiased information to empower you and a lot of compassion in the comfort of your own home. Are you ready to have a positive birth experience? Are you ready to demand compassion in birth? Because you and your baby deserve it. Let's get going. Before we dig in, I need to tell you about 4 things that you really need to take into consideration when planning for your birth. And not paying attention to it can actually lead to frustration and disappointment and even resentment in birth. I know I've been there a lot of times. So the 4 things that's really important to take into consideration or to know is, number 1, your birth team is important. You would think that I would have known that by my second pregnancy, but it took me a while to really understand that your birth team is so important. Number 2, compassion in birth is not just a benefit, it's a must. It's not a nice to have. You must experience compassion in birth for you and your baby. Number 3, knowledge is power. I know this sounds like a cliche, but it really is true in terms of birth as well. to hope for an optimized birth is not enough, especially not if you have structures and systems and a world around you that does not support that, that does not support you having an optimized and compassionate birth. So you do need to empower yourself with knowledge. And number 4, there is no such thing as a perfect birth. This is really important, and we'll talk a lot about this later on, but know that there is no such thing as a perfect birth. There's something like a positive birth. In this course, I will explain to you how to embrace these 4 truths so that you can also optimize your birth and have a wonderful positive birth experience, one with compassion and one that you will love. In this first video, I'm going to explain to you what compassion in birth is and why your emotional well-being in birth, yours and your baby's, is just as important as your physical or your clinical well-being. I'm also going to share with you the process of selecting your birth team, your A-team. It's a process that I developed after years of experience, both personal and on a professional. I've developed this video because in my profession, I see 2 kinds of pregnant women. On the one hand, there's women that are overwhelmed with biased information that predominantly focuses on the physical act of giving birth. And then on the other side, I have pregnant mothers who actually don't have any information. I sort of fell in the second category with my first pregnancy. And what both of these groups have in common is that there's no focus on the emotional journey. For both these groups of women, it's easier to walk into birth with a blind trust in their birth teams who they didn't really pay that much attention to in terms of selecting, and just hope for a positive birth journey, just hope for the best. It saddens me when I so often consult with pregnant mothers who do not like their OBGs, their gynecologist or their midwives, and yet they're going to have this person oversee one of the most important experiences of their lives because they know best. Wouldn't you say that's a recipe for disappointment? I could go on with loads of examples, but I know from professional and personal experience that all women need compassion in birth, and all parents need compassion in birth, and that it is something that is really lacking. I understand how birth and how you experience birth emotionally can have an impact on the rest of your life as a parent. I know how the lack of information can actually lead you into a birth that hoping that it will be perfect, and how you can actually feel really disappointed afterwards for not knowing more, for not making more informed and empowered choices. I know that because that is actually my story as well with the birth of my first. I don't know how many of you know this, but I'm a mother of 3, and I will not forget one of my birth experiences. But let me start with my first one. I will never forget the birth of my first child. He is the person that made me a mother, and I will forever treasure that. That's really special. But there was also something missing in my birth experience with my first. It was nobody's fault. It was really one of those things that if you don't know better, you can't do better. So I wanted a natural birth. That was really important to me. But I didn't really know that much about giving birth. I just assumed, that if you wanted a natural birth, that is what would happen. You would go to the hospital and you would have your baby naturally. It didn't work out that way for me. I was actually, I was overdue. I was pregnant for 42 weeks and I just didn't go into labor. And the next thing I knew, the gynecologist told me that I would have to be induced for this baby to arrive naturally. Otherwise a C-section would be required. I didn't even know what an induction was. I just understood that it would actually help the baby to come. And I went to the hospital the next day, had an induction, and so that was the start of really, really painful surges. I don't know how many of you know this, but an induced labor can actually be really painful. So first of all, that was my first introduction to birth surges or to contractions. It was really painful, but I was still determined. I wanted to have my baby in a natural way. And that continued for about 12 hours. I was in labor for 12 hours. After 12 hours, they kept monitoring me. Oh, that was the other thing. I didn't know that there were things that I could help to, or that I could do to assist labor. I didn't know that I could walk around, and that I did not have to be monitored all the time or lie on the back of, on my back on the bed. I didn't realize that there was an option of walking around. This was nobody's fault. Nobody suggested it because I didn't really ask for it, but I didn't know that it was an option. And so I didn't do everything within my power to assist labor, to assist labor. And so I just basically lied on my back and hoped for the induction to work and fought through every single surge for 12 hours. The other thing I didn't know was that lying on your back can actually make surges even more uncomfortable. It can actually make your contractions worse. And that walking it off is sometimes a pain management technique, but I didn't know that. And so I lied on the back for most of my 12-hour birth, induced 12-hour birth, which was really, really painful, but I actually didn't want an epidural. I knew that much. I knew I didn't want an epidural. After 12 hours, unfortunately, my gynecologist detected that the heart rate was actually dropping, and it was decided for safety reasons that my son would be delivered via C-section. And so he was born. I will remember that first cry forever. I can still hear it. It was life-changing. It was also very traumatic for me because I saw him briefly and then they wrapped him up and he and my husband went off to the nursery to have him weighed and measured. And I was pushed to post-op where I lied for about an hour wondering what my beautiful newborn really looked like. That was really traumatic for me. But again, it didn't cross my mind to ask for skin to skin. It didn't cross my mind because first of all, I never planned for a natural birth or for a C-section. I never planned for it. And secondly, so I just thought I would have a natural birth, but it didn't happen. That was my first, thing that I didn't plan for. And secondly, I didn't know anything about C-sections. If I knew little about natural birth, I knew even less about C-sections. So I didn't know what to ask in a C-section situation. I could have asked for skin to skin. I could have asked for my husband to cut the cord. There were many things that I could have asked for a gentle C-section, but I didn't because I actually didn't know. And so, unfortunately, it was an hour, or more than an hour, before I finally got to hold my firstborn. And oh, was it wonderful to hold him and breastfed him, which came naturally and easy. It was easy for me and loved it. Back to this video. The purpose of this video is to help you understand what compassion in birth is so that you can actually ask it from your birth team and also yourself. To help you, I've created a PDF for you to take notes on. You can stop this video now to download it and then continue with the course. I define compassion in birth as a deep sympathy and empathy with the pregnant mother, her baby, and her partner, accompanied by a strong desire to look after their physical and their emotional needs in birth. That's important, their physical and emotional needs in birth. Unfortunately today, a lot of focus is being put on the physical needs in birth. It is clear that your birth team would be your main source of compassion in birth. And that is why selecting your birth team, your A team for birth, is so important. But who does your birth team consist of? Who can it consist of? I'm going to briefly touch on the different role players in birth. First of all, there's your primary healthcare provider. Your primary healthcare provider is your OBG, your gynecologist, or your private midwife, who is actually backed, in the case of an emergency, by a private gynecologist. Or if you don't fall under medical aid, you can have a private midwife, and then should you need backup, you can go to state hospital. There's also the situation where you might have, that could be at an active birthing clinic, where you have a hospital appointed midwife as your primary healthcare provider with gynecologist backup, and in state hospitals that would also probably be the structure there. You would have a hospital appointed midwife that actually is your primary healthcare provider with the backup of an OBG. In private hospitals, if you have a gynecologist as your primary healthcare provider, you will have a hospital appointed midwife as your secondary birth team. The second person that can be part of your birth team, and this is a role that I think is really, really important, is the doula. A doula is a woman or a man that supports you in birth. That can be a natural birth or a C-section. A lot of people think that doulas are only there for natural births. They are there for C-sections as well. The role of the doula on the emotional side is she's sort of the communications manager of your birth team. So she sets the tone for your birth team, and she holds the birth space in terms of your requirements and desires on an emotional level. On a physical level, the doula can actually also support you. They can assist with pain management. They can assist to limit interventions. There's lots of physical ways that a doula can assist you in birth as well. The role of the doula in terms of your secondary birth team, which we'll get to a bit later, is also crucial. The third person that forms part of your birth team is your birth partner. That can be your husband, your life partner. Some women want their mothers, the grandmothers of the baby, present as their birth partners. It really just depends on who you want, the person that you want at your birth. Sisters are sometimes also great birth partners. The role of the birth partner should not be underestimated. They also bring a very specific presence to the birth team, and they are actually going to meet a lot of your physical and emotional needs. So it is important that you communicate your expectations to your birth partner that you've selected for birth. The fourth person that can be part of your birth team, and this role is really close to my heart because it is what I specialize in apart from birth mentoring, is a birth photographer. The value of having those irreplaceable memories of birth captured by a birth photographer, I can go on and on about it, which I won't do today. But it is important that should you decide to have a birth photographer capture this special journey for you, that you also select your birth photographer wisely, because they will form part of your birth team. They too bring a certain presence to your birth space, and it can't just be someone that can snap away. It needs to be someone that understands your emotional needs in birth, understands the physical aspects of birth, and has a high level of professional and ethical experience and standards. I've asked the gynecologists who I regularly work with and who I really respect to briefly explain the role of the OBG in birth, and also to give ideas as to how gynecologists can maybe focus more on the emotional aspects of birth without compromising on the clinical aspects of birth.
I am Marlena Letoy. I'm an obstetrician gynecologist working at the Louis Leipold Clinic. To be an obstetrician is not just a job for me, it's one of my passions. I really enjoy what I do. I really enjoy, and it's a privilege to have a journey with a couple during their pregnancy. I would like to tell you a little bit about the role of an obstetrician in today's world. I do believe we all have a place in this specific sphere, the obstetric or the pregnancy sphere. We as obstetricians should make sure that you have a low risk pregnancy. We do that with some blood tests and ultrasounds that we do at specific times. With routine visits, we look at all the factors and decide and make sure that this is a low risk, or if there's problems, we identify that and we treat that appropriately. Our aim should be to help you have a good and joyous experience on the day of this baby's birth. Every child is so special, and if it's your first or second or third time, it should be a special day. It is also important that your obstetrician helps you to make the right decisions with regards to how you are going to give birth. If it is the natural way, which I believe that all women should have an opportunity to give birth naturally, that is how I think we were made to give birth. Every woman should have a chance to decide if she wants to have a normal delivery, or if there's an obstetric reason. One must be open-minded and see the point. A doctor should explain that to a patient, why there's an indication for cesarean. And then there is some women who just prefer not to go that route and do make the choice to go for an elective cesarean section. I don't think one should judge a woman's decision. It's every person's choice how you want to deliver. And an obstetrician should support a patient with regards to that decision and just helps her to make the decision that's right for her. Birth to me is a wonderful thing. It is two cells connecting, and 9 months later there is a perfect little baby. That's what it's like in most cases. To meet your child for the first time, change a mother and a father for the rest of their life. To be present during such an experience, if it's the long hours of a normal delivery, or if it's in the daunting operating room having a cesarean section for whatever reason, it should be a human environment. Your life partner, husband should be there. If you prefer to have the help of a doula, one should have that opportunity, I think. I also think that it's important that the patient, the lady that's delivering, she should stay well informed on what is happening and how she's progressing if it's a normal birth. And she should be offered choices with regards to pain relief. I believe, as obstetrician, that if there was an obstetric indication for cesarean section, and if it was an uncomplicated procedure, if a patient falls pregnant for the second time, she should be offered the option of having a normal birth. This is a procedure that we refer to as a VBAC, vaginal birth after cesarean section, and I do encourage all women, if they want to have that option, that they should discuss it with their obstetrician. And it is available in South Africa, and we can offer it. And I do think it is something that women should embrace if they have the wish to give birth normally, even after cesarean section. One cannot be induced. It's not the best way to treat a patient, but if we stick to the guidelines and the rules, that is something that one can consider. It is just important that the birth stays safe for both the mother and her baby.
I've asked a midwife who I work with and who I really respect to explain the role of the private midwife in birth and how private midwives can assist on both the emotional level in birth but also on the clinical or the physical side to birth.
Hi, I'm Glynis Garrett. I'm one of a team of private midwives called Birth Options. There are 4 of us in the team, and our aim is to bring midwifery care to more women because we see that there's a great need for that. Women are looking for private midwifery, particularly because they know that one midwife will be with them throughout their labour and birth, as opposed to in and out the labour ward and only arriving for the birth. So the continuity of care that midwifery gives is really what women are seeking out. How this differs from a labour ward sister or a midwife in a labour ward is that we take on our own clients and we get to know them on a one-on-one personal basis, and then we're there for every single contraction once they go into the hospital, and to continue right through it to assisting at the birth and catching the baby, so to speak. We also provide care afterwards and make sure that the mum and baby are seen as a unit, and hopefully our input then helps them to get a solid grounding to motherhood and parenthood. Very often there's a saying that says as long as the baby's okay, it doesn't really matter how the birth goes. But actually that's not really true. It is very important for the mum to be included in this process of birth as well. We're not only birthing a baby, we're birthing a mum, and she needs to be understood and felt cared for as an integral part of this process, and her wishes need to be valued and taken into account as well. Yes, sometimes things don't go as one wishes for them to go, but then we can help make sure that that process, or plan B, is actually a positive experience for her. When I did my nursing training, which included midwifery at the time, many years ago, I hadn't intended to continue with midwifery afterwards, but I very vividly recall a birth that I went to at one of the government hospitals, where it was almost like a saloon door, where it got kicked open, mum's legs were in stirrups, 20 people were in the birthing room, and I realized then that this has to change. Women have to be afforded better care than that, and for their labours and births to be seen as a very special, spiritual, amazing experience, as well as the physical need for the baby to be born. And to hold a mum in that space is something that one learns with time, but what we are passionate about doing, and what we spend a lot of energy ensuring that mum comes out of her birth experience, no matter what it was, feeling empowered and strong and able to start this journey of motherhood.
That brings us to the secondary birth team. The secondary birth team doesn't really get enough attention, and yet they form such a big part of your birth experience. In hospital, your secondary birth team would consist of your hospital-appointed midwife, who would be there for the most part of your birth. She would oversee the biggest part of your birth. If you have a gynecologist or an OB-GYN as your primary healthcare provider, he will oversee the process and she will support you through birth. If you're in a private hospital or at an active birthing hospital where the gynecologists are only there for backup, you can actually, and you don't have a private midwife, you will actually have the hospital appointed midwife oversee the biggest part of your birth. So that's the first role player in your secondary birth team. That's really important. You can see why she's important, or he's important, because they will be there for the biggest part of your birth if it's a natural birth. It also consists of your labour ward nurses. If you're going for a C-section, the theatre matrons the theatre nurses, the paediatrician, the anaesthetist. The anaesthetist is a really, really important person in your birth experience if you're going to have a C-section. So there's the anaesthetist, the lactation consultant. It's really important in terms of your secondary birth team. So I bet you didn't even think about these people, but they are all going to be role players in your birth if you're going to give birth at a hospital. And they need your attention as well. Let me be transparent here. With your secondary birth team, you don't have that much control as to who is going to be on your team. There's some level of control, you have some choices in it, but generally you don't have that big a say in who your secondary birth team will be in a hospital situation. But we will get back to that shortly. But back to your primary birth team and compassion. How do you make sure that you will receive compassion from your primary birth team? How do you determine whether the people that you are choosing for your primary birth team has compassion in birth and will have that for you in birth? There's 5 questions that you can actually ask to determine whether a person, whether it's the doula, whether it's the primary healthcare provider, has compassion for you in birth. The first thing that you need to ask yourself is, does this person know what compassion in birth is? When you talk about compassion in birth, watch their reaction. Do they know what it means to be compassionate in birth? In the old days, compassion in birth would probably be described as a good bedside manner. The second point is, does this person have compassion for him or herself? That's really important. You can't have compassion for someone else if you do not have compassion for yourself. Number 3, does this person have the ability to understand and, most importantly, respect my feelings when it comes to birth and parenthood, even if they don't agree with it? Number 4, does this person conduct himself or herself in a mindful manner? If you don't know what mindfulness means, I'm going to explain it very briefly. Mindfulness is to be very aware of the way you live, the choices you make, and aware of others and the choices they make. It's to be very present in your choices and in your experiences when it comes to life. So not thinking about your choices, not slowing down to really experience things, is to be mindless. So that's the opposite of being mindful. Is this person mindful? And the last one, and probably the most important one, does this person have the ability to listen to me, or are they just lecturing me? Do they listen to me? Do they really try to gain knowledge about me? Not just on a clinical level, because that is important, knowledge about your the clinical aspects of birth, that's obviously important, but also, are they trying to understand me as a person on an emotional level? Those are the 5 things that would help you to determine whether the person that you are employing or appointing to be part of your birth team has compassion in birth. So those are 5 very nice points, but it's not that easy to determine that of of your birth team. I mean, how do you know? How do you evaluate that? And it's one of those situations. I mean, for instance, I never really looked at my birth team. I just decided this is going to be, it was just a convenience thing for me. And so, how do you, if you have the mindfulness to really handpick, not nitpick, that's not a nice word, handpick your birth team for yourself. How do you go about determining whether the different role players have the sort of compassion that you want in birth? You've got 2 options here. There's really meeting with that person, discussing it with that person in consultation or just in an informal manner. I've had many clients have an open discussion with both their midwives and their ecologists, and walking away from that feeling empowered, feeling enthusiastic because they felt heard. But it's so often that we forget they're human beings as well, and that if we talk to them, we can actually determine a lot about them and how they see our births. And that's important. So firstly, have a conversation with your primary healthcare provider. Discuss, what is important to you, and watch what his or her reaction to that is. So those are that's the first thing to do, is to actually talk, communicate. I don't know why we're so scared to communicate with our healthcare providers. It's like we think they know everything, and on the clinical side, they most probably do. But we forget that they're human beings as well, and that we can actually ask them or tell them what is important to us and see how they react and see if we gel. For instance, in birth photography, I make it a point to really meet with clients, to go for a coffee, even before they've actually signed or actually employed me to capture their birth, to have a coffee with them and discuss their birth and discuss them and who they are and what they're about, and to tell them more about myself, so that we can actually find out whether this is a match, whether this is a good match, whether I am someone they would want at their birth. That's really important. It's the first step for me in terms of employing a birth photographer. And a birth photographer is just one small role player in your birth. Can you just imagine how much more important a conversation with your primary healthcare provider is about who they are and who you are? I think that's really important. Okay, so that was the first step. Talk, communicate. The second step in finding out whether there is compassion for you and your birth and what you want is really references from other moms. People who've gone through this, like myself, who've experienced it, and who can actually tell you a bit more about what worked for them, who worked for them, what didn't work for them, why it didn't work for them. References from other moms is a really, really good starting point. I'll be honest. Compassionate birth professionals who are interested in both the clinical and emotional aspects of birth are unfortunately not a dime a dozen. But I can really vouch for putting time into finding as close to the A team for your birth as possible. You'll never find a perfect team, but getting as close to it as possible is really, really worthwhile. Your secondary birth team, as mentioned, they're much harder to control. If you think your first birth team or primary birth team is difficult, your secondary one is even more difficult. But there are ways to have more information, to make more empowered choices. You can go on a hospital tours. If you're going to have a hospital birth, go on hospital tours, go on more than one, and actually ask questions. And don't just ask questions about the physical aspects of birth. Ask questions about the emotional aspects of birth to find out whether there's compassion in birth in that specific hospital or facility. And not just only in terms of the people, but actually in terms of the setup. Is the environment, is the hospital setup conducive to compassion in birth? Again, references, asking other people about their experiences. And again, you'll get different opinions. But asking questions in that regard is important. Asking people that you trust as well. You can actually talk to the hospital experience manager. A lot of people don't even know that that person exists. There's a hospital experience manager at most hospitals, and you can actually talk about your emotional and your clinical needs beforehand to the hospital experience manager. Ask them the questions that you might have in terms of the birth facilities. So that's another person you can go to. Then back to the doula. I briefly told you about the role of the doula in terms of your primary health team, but now to your secondary health team. Your doula can actually be the bridge there as well. I often see how doulas are actually the mediator between your secondary birth team and your primary birth team and yourself. So again, the doula can actually be immeasurable in terms of setting the tone of your secondary birth team as well, because she is the person that will understand what your emotional and clinical needs are and communicate that to your secondary birth team. She's also often the person that will demand compassion on your behalf, because let's face it, when you're giving birth, it's the last thing you do is being demanding. So she can actually demand it on your behalf. And then there's also hope at the end of the light at the end of the tunnel. There are programs. I myself are involved with a program where the secondary birth teams are being trained in terms of compassion in birth. I briefly asked Harriet Kane, a registered wombs doula who has served labouring mothers into the wee hours of the morning with me, about the benefits of a doula when it comes to compassion in birth and also in terms of your secondary birth team.
I think one of the main benefits of having a doula is that the labouring mother and her partner have 24-hour support. So we're with a mother at her side throughout the labour. We are not medically trained, but we trained in more emotional and physical support. So a lot of massage, a lot of reflexology, a lot of postural changes. We'll get a mum in and out of the bath. We'll help her to cope with her contractions. But we also help the dad feel very much involved in the birth of his child. So it can be quite alarming for a guy to come into a labour room and see his wife or his partner in pain, and our role is to be very sympathetic to that and to help him to support her in the right way. So I see a doula as a support not just for the labouring mum, but for the couple in their labouring, in the welcoming of their child to the world. Often in a birth, the labouring mum is alone. There are teams of midwives around, but there might be other births going on. The obstetrician generally doesn't get involved until the end, until the mum is ready to push her baby out. And it's very nice for a couple to have support all the way through their birth. So a lot of clients come to me because they're looking for somebody to be with them alongside them throughout the whole birth. Of course there's the medical support of the staff all around, but they're not necessarily with a mum all the way through her birth. So aside from going to the bathroom occasionally, we're at the side of a mum all the way through her birth, or a dad. And the dads find that very reassuring as well, because it takes the pressure off them slightly and it allows them to enjoy their birth a little bit more than they would do if they were on their own. We help a mum cope with her contractions or surges, and we provide alternatives to pain relief before she really feels that she needs to take any pain relief. For example, getting her in and out of the water, which can be hugely beneficial. Moving around, doing different postures, different shapes with her body, which can help to bring the labour on or help to the baby to get in the right position. We help through touch, through massage, through homeopathic remedies, through essential oils which are very useful to burn in the labour room to help speed the labour up, to control or to manage the pain. But we don't do anything medical, so we don't take blood pressure, we don't take the fetal heart rate of the baby. We're just there to support the mum emotionally, physically, spiritually, and all of that. We are allowed into theatre should the birth not progress in the way that it needs to be progressing and surgery needs to take place. We are allowed into the theatre, and then it becomes a slightly different role, and we just keep a mum very focused and very calm in quite a scary, quite a clinical environment. So we try to make it as gentle as possible. We can bring music into the room. We can certainly still use a lot of the techniques that we were bringing from the labour room. But we can help explain to the mum what's going to happen as she transfers from the labour room into the theatre. And also afterwards. So our role is very important after the birth of a baby in supporting a mum through her breastfeeding, in explaining to some of the things that happen normally, bleeding, anxiety, all of those sorts of things. So postnatally or post-birth, our role is quite important as well. It always makes me laugh, some of the slightly alternative things that I do as a doula. Often if a mum does take an epidural or does take a break in the birth of her baby, taking pain relief, I've been sent off to Woolies, I've gone to feed a cat, I've taken lots of photographs, I've given the dad a massage, we've done some yoga in the birthing room, all sorts of things. But it's really just having dedicated support, dedicated resource who's experienced and seen a birth and experienced some of the strange things that might happen during a birth. So that's what we do.
In video 2, I'm going to show you how to find clarity and confidence in birth and in your birth choices by empowering yourself with knowledge. I'm going to talk to you about a birth plan, or birth preferences as I prefer to call it, and provide you with your own template for drawing up a birth plan or birth preference outline. Finding clarity and confidence in birth by empowering yourself with information is not that hard, and I will show you how in video 2. Before we go today, I would really appreciate it if you could leave a comment below this video. Tell me what compassion in birth means to you. Do you think having a compassionate birth team would make a difference in terms of your birth experience? Or if you've already given birth, can you tell how compassion had an impact, or the lack of compassion had an impact on your birth experience? And if you found this video helpful, please help me to empower more parents by sharing it on your social media network. Understanding what compassion in birth is and how it is a necessity and not just a nice to have means that you are already one step closer to having an optimized, positive birth experience, one that you will really love. Because birth is more than just delivering a newborn, which in itself is a miracle. It is also about becoming a parent. And in birth, parenthood and birth, it is about the journey as well and not just the destination. In the next video, we will talk about feeling overwhelmed with all the choices and options in birth, and I will share some easy steps in becoming clear and confident in your choices. I can't wait to see you in the next video. Be sure to join me. If you haven't subscribed for all 3 At the Heart of Birth introductory course videos, you can do so now at the link below.